This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. I just found this really cool channel that reviews spaceships, and they've got this video that went up on January the 27th in 1986. Hey guys, welcome to Reviewing Spaceships. Today I'm looking at the Challenger. It looks amazing and can fit 7 people in it. Like and subscribe. I wanted to explore this idea again because it's something that's come up. I decided maybe just to call this video "We Need to Talk About Negative Reviews" rather than a different title that I had, which was kind of, does this person have a point about negative reviews? Because a very big kind of gear player and guy in the YouTube space has kind of just put up a video hoping that folks would watch it and make less negative reviews as a consequence. I'm decided that maybe because this person was talking about kind of sniping videos and stuff like that, that maybe I'd try and not, at least for a moment, not refer specifically to this person. The world of making videos with guitar products kind of starts, I think, for everyone pretty much the same. You get a camera and you probably start making pieces of footage and gear with bits of stuff that you already have, right? And some of the people that can play really well or make videos really well or do it all very well, I think early on there's channels like Anderton's, Rob Chapman, and people that were doing this at the outset. I think initially it did seem to start off from this point of view that like it was people kind of talking to a camera, and I think there are folks that got quite big early on from doing that sort of thing. And what I've noticed in my own little kind of YouTube career is that as the audience grows, the opportunities grow, and maybe what you thought back then doesn't really apply anymore, and that things just shift a little bit, and you go from being what I think is quite close to a consumer to being more of a professional, and potentially your access to this stuff changes. Basically, where before there were no opportunities for me as a guitarist, I can say that now that there are, companies asking, are you going to be at NAMM? There are companies that ask me, will you demo this piece of gear? I do get emails even from companies that I've made jokes about saying, can you check out this new piece of gear? What's your fee? And that's me who's done a fair amount of these negative reviews, right? So there is money to be made in this space, I guess, and a career to be had. And that's one aspect of this. So on the one hand, I think you have kind of two tensions here. There's on the one side, you've got folks that are happy to do gear demos, take money for them. And generally, the approach with that is that you don't demo gear that you don't like. This is a line that a lot of people take, and I guess that's fine. And then on the other side, you have a consumer that makes videos and that spends their money on gear. I guess another small point to make is that although you get like the channels that will say I don't demo gear that I don't like or that I'm not inspired by, it doesn't mean that those people don't have pieces of gear that they didn't like or didn't inspire by. All it means is that they're not sharing that information particularly. And that's not necessarily a negative or a bad thing, but the people that are doing that are just kind of putting some of those preferences up front and sharing some of those biases. For me personally, for example, I initially felt like the PRS Silver Sky SE and the DGT SE were kind of expensive, and I thought that was fair to share. Would I have done that if I was being paid to do a demo? Probably not. But at the same time, I think that's kind of what you get with this. There is a selection process anyway going on, potentially for these folks that are doing demos of pieces of gear only that they like, apparently. It's just they're not necessarily sharing that, and they're filtering out maybe some of the stuff that actually might also help you to filter out stuff as well. This is something I find useful about that pedal show, for example. Like if you put 4 overdrive pedals next to each other and shoot them out, then, for the consumer, they can pick the one, actually, well, this sounds closest to what I would be looking for from a drive pedal. That's kind of what it's about in some ways. And I think there's a balance between these things that we can try to skirt. So I'm on neither side, and I think, so from the consumer point of view, I think this is where some of this tension comes up, that you see, like, for instance, yesterday, if you're kind of thinking, like, what are these negative reviews, like, who is that of any benefit for, or why would you want to talk honestly about some of this gear stuff? I think that the gear space has a little bit of a thing which is a little bit different to some other spaces. So, for instance, you could buy product A from a company, and at any point, like an hour or 6 hours later, there might be a launch of a brand new version of that thing, and as a consumer, you're kind of then stuck thinking, well, why? I'm a bit disappointed now. If I had known that this other thing was coming along, I'd have made a different choice. That's kind of an extreme example, but in the modelling space, where you could, for instance, spend £1,500 on a Kemper, and then the next day a Quad Cortex comes out, and people are comparing the thing and going, actually, this Quad Cortex is substantially better at various things. There's some choices that can be made in this space which are actually kind of significant for the consumer in a way. And of course, it's not entirely the responsibility of whoever, but this doesn't really happen so much in the kind of gaming world, for example, where I've been talking to my buddy Jim about this a bit. Like, the PS5 was confirmed to be in production for a fair amount of time, I think a year and a half, and so you don't get necessarily quite the same thing going on. Although I guess you could buy a PS4 and then the next day they could announce, in a year and a half's time there'll be a PS5. But you get what I mean. There's like a bit of a run up. In the same way, I think the consumer point of view for a lot of this stuff is that you see on day one launch a bunch of people that have not paid for this gear, that are celebrating this piece of gear, which isn't actually that difficult to do. It's quite easy to find positive stuff to say about stuff that has been sent to you for free and that you're being paid to kind of demo. Like, that is kind of a nice position to be in, right? This is, I think, what some of the kind of having a more critical or kind of balanced view of actually a product in the wider market space, which is, I think, what some of this negative review stuff is about. Picking apart, well, what plugin does this, which modeler does this, if you want a modeler to be able to do this, can this latest thing do it? It's kind of just your yin and yang. There's marketing, and then there's kind of reality. There's kind of, I think that's what it's about in a way. I was involved in the launch of the Walrus Audio Meraki, which they sent me, and are going to pay me an amount of money to do a video with it, and hopefully have. This is a nearly £600 piece of gear that everyone else out in the world probably would have to spend their own money on, right? And as someone on YouTube with opportunities and access to this gear, we're actually in a little bit of an odd position. And I think it's easy to forget that other people literally have to spend money on this gear. And so this is, I think, the crux of why there might be some value in some negative reviews and stuff. So there are two sides to this. There's either you want kind of all positive stuff, and okay, you take your money from the manufacturer, you make a piece of kind of marketing material that the company are going to appreciate, and that maybe your playing is amazing on it and people are going to love it anyway. Or you go down this route of there are going to be kind of occasional conversations where you're going to compare the thing, put it in context with what else is on the market. And for me, what that actually means is picking apart in some cases what this thing doesn't do that other stuff on the market might do. Or it might be saying, actually, I didn't think that this thing merited the price tag. So this is the real key for me, is that something like the Fender Tone Master Pro, which I had to, well, I didn't have to, but I bought one of them with my own money because I thought it was interesting. I was skeptical and cynical, as I am of most things, as I think most potential purchases are. And you think, right, well, that's a lot of money for a piece of gear. Let's see how it stacks up against the competition. And I think that's a valid kind of stance to take. You could either say, you know, everyone who does a paid demo is a total shill and they don't have any honest opinions. And by that same token, you could say anyone who does a negative review is really just in it for the views and are only doing it for clicks. And I think probably the truth is somewhere in the middle of all of that stuff. Like, I could make videos on Matteo Mancuso licks that might not do as many views as it took me in terms of effort and stuff, or videos on jazz stuff that again won't get many clicks. There's a reason that I do those as well. It's because I think hopefully someone out there gets something useful out of it. And that's also the reason that you might want to do a video where you're comparing the Kemper and the Quad Cortex and saying, this is what I found it does, this is where the differences are, because someone somewhere watching that video is going to have to spend, you know, £1,500, £1,600 on this piece of gear. And I think they're actually looking, or some people are looking, for the differences between pieces of gear. And in some cases, that might be about highlighting specifically some of the negatives, rather than just finding what is amazing about every single piece of gear or what you love about every single piece of gear. I'm not immune from those criticisms as well. Anytime I do a glowing kind of review of a product or anything like that, something that I really am enthused about, like the Boss IR2, which again I bought. People assume that you've been paid to do those demos anyway, or I guess like the PRS DGT SE and the Friedman IRX. I bought all of these pieces of gear, and even the things that I'm very positive about, again, people are going to assume that you're doing things in some ways for this paid shill element, even though you might not have received anything from those companies, or just went out and bought the piece of gear like a normal person would. I try to do that quite often. Likewise, it's not true that everyone making a negative review is just doing it because they want the clicks and stuff. Some people, like this is me literally, people will see me using a Fender Tone Master Pro, and apparently some people will see that as a recommendation in and of itself. And people that have watched even the negative stuff that I've kind of highlighted about it have still bought Tone Master Pros and they're still happy with them, I think. Let me know in the comments if you're one of them. Likewise with the Neural DSP Quad Cortex, I think early on with that I had to kind of just show that this is where it's at in its stage. You know, for that reason and probably other reasons, I don't think Neural DSP would ever want to work with me, but kind of that was the risk that I took in order to kind of try and do this thing that was maybe slightly useful for the people that were watching those videos. If that makes any sense at all. There is, of course, tension with all of this stuff. On the one hand, if you are going to take money from companies and stuff like that, then I think a little bit less of this negative kind of thinking is going to happen automatically, because it's going to be awkward if you then show up and, I don't know, two notes who are paying you to do stuff. I like, why are you making Ian Watkins jokes? That's a definite thing. But I do think, for me personally,
the reason that I would try and do some reviews where you talk about stuff fairly and put it into context, that is literally what it's about for me. It's about, okay, there is this piece of gear, the marketing says this, well, what is it actually in context when we look at the wider marketplace, given that most of us would put money onto this thing, and you can't just sell the piece of gear and recoup everything that you've put into it in general, unless you have like a decent return policy, like I guess Sweetwater and places do. So I think, yeah, that is kind of the responsibility of the gear reviewer. If you're actually going to call yourself a gear reviewer, in some ways, I think sometimes maybe the odd negative review, the odd thing where you're like, I'm not totally sure about this thing actually. If you're reviewing stuff, surely there should be a little bit of that sometimes, right? Or are you just demoing stuff, which again is totally valid? I don't know. But yeah, I don't think we can lump every single negative review into the space of, well, this is just here to, I don't know, generate clicks or just to be negative or all that sort of stuff. Some people are just comparing things that are in the actual space in the world of buying guitar gear. But I can think of a few cases and point where this kind of, I wanted to bring up something. So like the Fender Tonemaster FR12, I actually read a lot of kind of negative things online around this hiss issue, and I thought it was important from my point of view to show in context what this hiss sounded like for me in my particular space with my unit, and I think hopefully that helped other people put it in context. And likewise, if someone had a really, really hissy kind of unit, I'd hope as well that they might put that on YouTube for people to make their own conclusions. I think, you know, someone that was more in the kind of realm of trying to help out with Fender or stay, you know, in good graces with them might just not talk about that hiss thing. I don't think that would be a better thing for the consumer. A lot of rambling there, but anyway, that was just my thoughts on that. I think there's definitely space for folks to do their entirely positive kind of demos of stuff, and I think there is, you know, artistic reasons for doing that. There might be business reasons for doing that. It might be easier to maintain relationships with companies if you're not a knobhead. But I think for the consumer, on the other hand, sometimes if a piece of gear needs to be put into the wider context that it exists in, and people are actually interested in, well, what does it actually do differently? I think there's also a space for people to do that as well. For instance, like Rhett Scholl talking about the Tonemaster Pro on his live video. I'm sure that's not exactly what Fender hoped when they sent him one, but that is the risk in some ways that you might take if you're going to engage with someone that has like a large following that is often vocal about stuff. And I think that's also okay to have preferences. You know, most guitarists that I speak to and friends of mine have things that they like, have things that they don't like. Why wouldn't a gear YouTube channel also be allowed to have preferences and find things that work for them and find things that didn't? I think that's got to be okay too, right? Let me know your thoughts in the comments and stay toxic.